All right, so what we're going to go over today are some aids to doing project management. The specific thing that we're going to look at is Microsoft Project, but we'll look at, we'll talk about other things as well. So the first thing then is a Microsoft Project. I believe it's in the ECF Windows Labs if you want to go in there and do it. But there are a lot of other substitutes around now. Google has one that's free. There are an awful lot of them with like 30-day evaluation periods and that sort of thing that you can use for the same thing. You can also get away with the kind of projects you're doing. You can get away with things like an Excel spreadsheet properly annotated or something along those lines. Anyway, I'll leave that entirely up to you, but what I'm going to do is just go over some of the basic techniques and things that are involved. So the first thing you do is this, of course, is in the planning stage, so it's that sort of darker yellow area there. It goes along with the technical design. Now, in this course, that's sort of the stage you're always at. There isn't as much an execution phase here. You might go to a prototype or something like that. You certainly will do analyses and so on. In a typical project, you would go through a certain amount of that planning stage to verify that the effort for doing this project is feasible. Then you would go into a more detailed technical design that would specify enough of the project that you could actually get started and go into the execution phase. So there are various kinds of project management software. It depends on what you're doing. If you're a civil engineer, you'll probably find that there are things specifically made for civil engineering. If you happen to be an electrical computer engineer like me, you'll find that there's virtually nothing out there that they assume that you can do it. In fact, there's some folks that think that somehow you can do a project just by kind of starting it. And if sometime you'll finish, those tend to be unmitigated disasters. But anyway, there you go. So lots of things. We're looking at Microsoft Project. So you first put in some information about the project. You say when you're going to actually start it, start dates, something like that. And you fill in information about the project, like its name, its purpose, that kind of thing. And that sort of sets up all of the reporting and what have you. We're going to go over a number of things. I'm not just going to show you how to use this tool, but I'm going to show you some of the aspects of the tool that tend to be common to these kinds of pieces of software. One of the big things here is leveling, and we'll go over that, and resource allocations and so on. All right, so let's go to an example here. There we go. So this is what you see when you see Microsoft Project. So what you see at the left is a list of tasks. Over here at the left, on the right, you see what's called the Gantt chart, right? This is a chart of this is a chart that basically shows you the time and the sequence and so on. So let me just set this up a little bit. There we go. All right, so you have the tasks here. We can add another task. Let's add another task. For now, it'll be like a task. We'll call it done. And as you can see, it fills in the default there of 1 day. Let me see if I can get this bigger for you. There we go. All right. So what this has done is it said, okay, here's our tasks. I just added another one. You can insert tasks, of course, and so on. And over in the very left-hand column there's an ID where you can actually add your own identification to the various things. So that's how you add the task. Now we go into the durations. So I'll fill in some durations here, and they'll all be in days, but you can fill in durations of weeks if you want. Days are good. You can do hours. It all depends on what you're going to do. So I'll fill in some numbers here. They'll just be sort of arbitrary numbers, so I'm not going to worry so much about what they are. We are, of course, doing a washroom here. Maybe you didn't notice it, or a kitchen. Sort of works out the same. But we've got to build the walls, rough in the walls. Then we put in the electric circuitry. We do some plumbing work to the stuff that's inside the walls. We have to do a plumbing inspection. Once the plumbing inspection's done, we can finish the walls, finish the electrics. Meanwhile, we can build some cabinets, and once the cabinets are ready, we can install them, and that'll take a few days. We can install the plumbing fixtures and a tub and the final lighting, and there's going to be some kind of final inspection of the physical aspects of the thing, and then another one that's the electrical inspection. This is typically the things like the structure and the plumbing are rolled into building permits that you get from the city, and the electrical inspection would be something that is handled by the power people. All right. And we'll say a day for done. So now we have all of these durations, and you can see it's taken away all those question marks because we've defined them now. And we have these tasks, and they're all sitting there with various times. Now what we have next, this next column is called predecessors. This basically is what tasks go in what order. So if I'm, for instance, roughing in the electric circuits, I can't do that before I build the walls. So task number 1 there precedes roughing in the electric circuits, or it's the predecessor for roughing in the electric circuits. When I put that in, you see over here on the right how we've now got this one bumped out and a little arrow connecting, and that means that this top task here has to be done first, and when it's finished, we can go to the second task. Similarly, the plumbing, we have to wait for the walls to be done. The plumbing inspection has to wait for the plumbing to be done. All right? So there. Now another thing to notice here, we've skipped over Saturday, Sunday. This is because it's assumed inside this program that nobody works on the weekends. They're built-in calendars. You can change that. You can say, oh, well, people, in fact, do work on the weekends, and so we can put that in. You can change the time frame. You can change the number of hours that are available, and so on. And I'll show you some of that. Once we've done the plumbing inspection and we've roughed in the electric circuits, we can finish the walls. So you see in that case we have 2 arrows coming into that block. We can finish the electrics once the walls are in. We can build the cabinetry right away, but we can't finish the cabinetry until we finish the walls. Oh, and we can't finish the cabinetry, of course, until after we've built it, so we have to, so I go back, I can correct that. Now I get an arrow from the finished cabinetry as well. We can now install the plumbing fixtures after we've finished the walls. So that's after 5, excuse me. There we go. We can install the tub after we've finished the walls. We can finalize the lighting once we've finished the electrics. We can do a final inspection once we've done, let's see what we've put in the tub, we've put in the plumbing fixtures, we've put in, and that should be actually enough. Okay, so that brings that in. The electrical inspection can be done after the final lighting. And we're done. We are done. Now, being done doesn't take a day. Being done, in fact, is a milestone. So what we do is we drop the number of days down to 0, and what we get is that little diamond thing. Okay, that's a milestone. The milestone being done comes after we've done the electrical inspection and after the final inspection. So in other words, after everything's finished, we're outdone, and that's how long our project's going to take. And you can see you've got a number of things all working in parallel and that sort of thing, and that's all reasonably good so far. Now, some things have to be delayed after other things. So let's just say, for instance, here we have rough in the plumbing. The plumbing inspection is going to take 3 days after we're finished, because we have to phone the inspector and then it's 3 days to come in. So what I do is I click on that link here, and that brings out a task dependency. So it says there's a task dependency between plumbing inspection, I'm not sure you can read this, from the rough-in of the plumbing to the plumbing inspection. It's finished to start. It means that the first one has to be finished before the second one starts. You can put in other relationships as well. Like, for instance, say you had a basement and it was under the water table and it was getting flooded, and so you needed a pump. The pump, having the pump in there, has to happen before you do the basement work, and it has to stay there until after the basement work. So you can set up that relationship with all of the tasks that are involved in the basement while the pump has to be there. You can say that the pump has to start before all those and has to end after all of those are finished. Anyway, you can put in all that sort of thing. The thing I was getting to was this lag. We said it was going to be 3 days. So 1, 2, 3 days of lag, it's called. Lag means one has to lag the other. So the plumbing inspection lags the rough-in. Okay, so what happens? Boom, everything moves out by 3 days. So that's lag. Now, if we have various views of this thing we can see. So let's view, let's see, other views, more views, detailed Gantt, okay? If we do that and we bring life back into where we can see it, you can see what's happened here. All of the tasks have now got this color, and you can see some of them are red and some of them are blue. The red ones are the critical path. So if you look at them, these are the things that must be done all in that order in order to get to finished in time. If any of those gets bigger, say this one here got bigger, so say the plumbing inspection took 2 days, watch what happens. Boom, everything moves out. It was on the critical path. These number of days here, this is the slack or the float of non-critical tasks. So if I take a task like final inspection and I increase it by a couple of days, nothing happens. The slack drops. We don't have as much slack, But the critical path didn't change, the end point of the project didn't change. That's exactly what we expect. Okay, so that's our critical path view. There are other kinds of views as well. We'll go over those. Let's go back to just the Gantt chart. Here we are. Okay, so here's our Gantt chart now. We have this thing called resources. So what resources do we have? Well, we have a carpenter who's going to do the walls for us. Let's make a little more room here if I can. Hello. Doesn't want to come out. Okay, carpenter. We have an electrician who's going to do the rough-in. The rough-in of the plumbing. We need a plumber to do that. Okay, so we have the thing, and you can see those names are coming up here. Now that's this specific piece of software does this, but basically you can use others. The plumbing inspection is going to be done by a plumbing inspector, so nobody there. It's going to be the carpenter that finishes the walls. And you can see we now have a drop-down list where we can pull stuff up. There, carpenter does the cabinetry. And whoop, we've got electrics here. So that should be the electrician. You can see as well that you can put multiple resources onto the same thing. We're not doing that here. Carpenter does that. Plumber does the plumbing fixtures. Plumber does the tub. Electrician does the lighting. We inspect, other people do the inspection, and we're done. So there we go. We've now allocated resources to those various tasks. Resources can be people. They also can be machinery. You know, we need a crane, or we need a pump, or we need something else, okay? So we have all of those things allocated to the various tasks. One thing I'll show you here, you see this carpenter up here? The carpenter's also down here. So the carpenter is back, in fact, allocated twice for the same time period. That's clearly wrong. One of the first sort of big company that I co-founded, we actually sold out to another company. That company kept us on to do work in their R&D and to help run the company. The owner of the place kept taking on projects because he would say, oh, how long would it take to do this? And you'd say, oh, 3 months. And he'd say, fine, 3 months. And then he'd say, how long to do this? And he'd say, 2 months. So in 3 months, we're going to have both of them done. That was his reasoning. Well, I finally realized what was going on, and it was starting to become critical. So I did something like this, and I charted out my time and my partner's time and the time of a couple of other principals. I was actually pretty light. I was only over-allocated about 6 to a factor of 6. My partner was over-allocated to a factor of 14. Which means that for every hour he had in his life, he actually had to work 14 hours in order to meet all the schedules. That clearly isn't a workable situation. By the way, I was ignored, and most of the projects didn't get done, of course. So you can see here, you see that little funny man here? That says the task is over-allocated. Let's look into let's look into resources. We can look into a resource graph here. Here's the plumber, okay? So if we look at the plumber and we go back to where we were, the plumber is over-allocated. There's places where the plumber has to work and do two things at the same time. That clearly isn't going to work. If we look at the carpenter, that was the one that we were starting with, we can again see early on the carpenter is over allocated. There's too much stuff. So what are we going to do about that? Let's go back to our Gantt chart view. Okay, here's our Gantt chart, and we have that problem. We go to Resource, and we say Level All. This is what's called leveling. It basically is a built-in function that says, I'm going to move stuff around in order to make it all work. So we'll click on Level All, and you can see things moved around. The carpenter, this task, the building of the cabinetry was moved ahead. You can see changes with the plumber too. I'll back up, and you can watch the plumber there. Watch right here. Okay, I'll do the leveling again, and you can see the plumber comes out. And now if we look at those charts, they'll all show that there isn't over allocation. So that's called leveling. Excuse me. Another thing we can do is create a hierarchy of tasks. So if I go into tasks here, I can produce a summary task. So here's our new summary task. Let me again get that big so you can see it. Whoops, here. And the task name will be cabinets, and whoops, there we go. Should have put that into those two. There's the cabinets. Okay, so there we go. We can put the cabinets in. Why is that not the same? Oh, I see. Okay, so you can see there those bars come in. Those are overriding tasks. If we choose to hide some of these other tasks, so we can hide them underneath, and basically we only end up with a summary task. That means that if we have a very large project, we can bring it all down. For each of these tasks as well, we can double click on it. That brings up an information sheet where we can put in more information about the thing, predecessors, what resources are needed, and various customizations that we have for the various tasks. Okay, and we can do the same with resources. We can bring up a resource sheet, and this here we can assign rates of work. We can change calendars. So for instance, if our carpenter is working on Saturdays, we can change the calendar that includes Saturdays. If our plumber is only available in the second week of February, we can change the calendar so it reflects only the second week of February. So all of the things that are in there all come out in this thing. So let me just go back again to the Gantt chart. I'll show you one more thing. You see how we have here the carpenter, and the carpenter is finishing the walls in 4 days. I can change that. Now this would be rather silly for this particular one, but I can change that to elapsed days. Because in some cases, what's going on just depends on calendar time and not on and not on days of the week. So in other words, if you have concrete that's curing, you don't need to take 2 days off for the weekend. It continues to cure even though it's a Saturday or a Sunday. What you do is you change that to an E day, a lapse day, and when you do that, you can see that it now happens over the Saturday, Sunday. So that's what a lapse day is. So we said finish the walls will be an elapse day, and so we've got the Saturday and Sunday included in that. All right, so that's basically how you put together a washroom. So we'll go back over that very quickly, just so I can show you how it works. We'll go back here. Slideshow from current slide. Yeah, good. Okay, so what we did was first thing we entered tasks, then we entered durations, how long they were going to be, and a milestone was 0 time. We entered predecessors, and that told us, excuse me, task order. We did lag and lead by double-clicking on the link, if there are, of course, other ways of doing it. We showed the critical path, and that gave us the slack time, or the float. We entered resources, and I showed you that it created a drop-down list. We looked at leveling those resources. So the first graph, or resource graph before leveling, showed over-allocation. We went to leveling, and by the way, you can get this happening automatically. It will automatically level this particular program. Some programs, simple ones, will not level at all. You have to notice the fact that that allocation is going, is double or triple or whatever. After you level, the things have moved out. Sometimes you'll get things like this, like split tasks. So the carpenter starts out doing something, but then shifts to something else. Why the shift? Because the item that was cut in is on the critical path. So it's very important that the carpenter move to that task, finish it, and then move back to the one that was started before. After you level, you can go back to a resource graph. You'll see that it's all okay. After that, you can create a hierarchy of tasks. So this shows you how. It creates a black bar, and you can hide those subtasks. There's a resource sheet, so you can do the resource sheet. So where this is really complicated for something like doing a washroom, but there are some things that are a little more complicated. One of the people in civil engineering was involved with the creation of Terminal 2. And if you look at it, it's kind of like the University of Toronto. It's but it's got, you have to have places for planes to come in, you have to have places for people to come in, you have to have a whole sewer system, a banking system, all kinds of facilities and things. It had a gigantic schedule. This is only part of the Gantt chart that was created. All right, now you may find that there are a lot of terms in project management that you don't quite understand. There's a website here that's on your notes that you can do it. Now, I'd like to go, I think, why don't we go now to the Alex question? Well, everything's sort of fresh in people's minds. Okay, this is going to take a few seconds here. The question has to do with adding resources, because if you, for instance, don't like the fact that your project is getting way out there, you may find that you have to add resources. So here you have a project, you've added a plumber to it, okay? So what's going to happen here? Task leveling, critical path change, potentially, delivery times for consumables, right? If you have plumbing supplies that have to arrive on site, is it possible that those arrival times will have to be juggled? Are all of them right? Is one of them right, or two, or possibly three? I made sure this problem wasn't about hockey because I got a lot of backlash about hockey not being a project. Fair enough. Look at my responses online. I think you'll sort it out. I think I like hockey because it's not a project, actually. Okay. I think we're fairly well along now. Okay, here we are. Correct answer, of course, is F. Let's look at it. Oh, we did pretty well there. We did pretty well there. Okay, let's look at the, whoops. Yeah, please. Let's look at those, at the various possibilities. Critical path could change. Well, there's no point in adding resources if you're not going to get some kind of benefit. Okay, the benefit of adding resources is the fact that your project is going to take less time. If it takes less time, critical path is definitely going to change. Task leveling, yeah, you've added a resource, so now you have a potential of things going on in parallel, so leveling will be a likely step. Delivery times for consumables could be affected. Well, if you're collapsing your project, that means that things are getting shuffled backwards. So things are going to have to arrive earlier. Maybe not just plumbing things, but other things as well, because things that depend on the plumbing being finished are going to then move backwards if you can get that all done faster. Now, just an aside here, if you add 10 plumbers to something in this program, it will allocate all 10 plumbers to a job and it will divide the time in 10. Okay, so you have to be a little bit careful about what goes on when you actually do add multiple resources of the same type. There's some other things you have to watch in this program. So I'll, laptop 2. There we go. Okay. Whoops. All right, so here's where we were. One of the things that can happen is you can say this is a typical academic situation. You say, okay, well, I had to deliver that document, and in between, I've got a bunch of other things to do and another document to do, and that document is due on a specific day. A lot of these things, the end date is fixed, all right? And you actually, part of project management is often shuffling things around so that it nicely fits the allocated time. But what you'll find is that even though there is a critical path here, it won't be noted by the software. That's because all of the routes in between the start point and the end point will have slack in them, because you've got lots of time in between the two documents to get the second document ready. You have more time than you need to do that and to do all the related tasks. Okay, so that's number one that you'll find, is that you don't get a critical path, even though there is one. Okay, slacken every path. Another thing that you'll find is that often your Gantt charts are gigantic. Okay, they go on for pages and pages and pages when you're trying to print them. And one of the things you can do with Microsoft Project, you can do it with other things, is you can reduce the scaling. So if you look at this, it has the Gantt chart itself, I can't show you here. The Gantt chart itself was divided into weeks or days or something like that. If you make the scale much more gross, much larger, and you reduce the number of items being shown in that scale, so here we're just doing one tier of scaling, and put in a size, then in fact you can drop the size of the Gantt chart that's being displayed. You'll get littler blocks, but it will be something that you can print out on a page. Okay, we'll just look at a couple of advanced things. We looked at elapsed time versus work time. So for instance, concrete cures even over a weekend, whereas someone actually doing the work may want to take Saturday, Sunday off, maybe other days, who knows. All right, so that's one of the big things. We talked about resource information sheets, and those allow you to actually put costing information on. You can also use this Gantt chart to keep track of how far you're going. So inside the tasks, you can say, I've done 20% of this, or 30%, or 90%, or something like that, and track how far along your project is and get some sort of idea of how things are going. Okay, one more thing I want to talk to you about, and that's the importance of keeping abreast of what the issues are. The way we do this, the way it's often done, is through status reports. Okay? What these are very important things that identify your project. So they say, here's the project, here's who is involved, and that sort of thing, the client, and so on. And it says, here's where we are. Here's where we got to as of the time I released this status report. It also says, here's what my problems are. It says what I'm going to be doing in order to fix those issues that I encountered, and what I'm going to be doing next. So, why are these all important? Well, if you're tracking a project, if you're trying to get a project done, you need to know where various things are, and you need to know well ahead of time what the problems are so that you can address them. Again, in my business, I had Mr. 90%, I called him. He was a great employee, but if you asked him where he was, how much was done, he would always say 90%. I never heard any other number. And what he really meant was, I'm 90% of started, or I'm 90% of done this particular problem. But he never it was always 90%. And he gave the impression it was 90% of the entire project. And of course, you realized fairly quickly that that couldn't humanly be possible. So getting these status reports and finding out exactly what was going on and where the problems were and talking about them, especially if you're a manager in a non-confrontational type of way. Because don't forget, these people, everybody's going to be making mistakes. Everybody's going to be doing things behind time. The kinds of estimates that people give you are always going to be a little suspect, okay? That's life. That's how life happens, and you, as a manager, have to make sure that everybody's really involved with the project, but also that you have a good idea of what's going on without sort of being in their face. These status reports and status meetings are the way to do those. So again, future tasks. So then the status report is what's done, what kind of problems and things we're encountering with what's happening presently, and where I expect to be the next time we have a meeting. These have been revised to somewhat in software. Anyone that's doing software will probably encounter agile software where there are these scrum meetings where this kind of thing or this kind of review, looking forward, looking back, are critically important. All right, and we're a few minutes early, but that's okay. Give you time to check your phones and things, and thank you very much. I'll see you, I think, in March.